Hi, everybody. I'm Ritchard. I'm codependent as hell, and sitting beside me is.
I'm Karen Kay. I'm also codependent.
And we live in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. Our home group is the Experience, Strength, and Hope group of Codependents Anonymous. If you ever find yourself stuck in Saskatoon on a Monday after the whole COVID thing is over, give us a call. We'd be delighted to take you to a meeting of some very excited and enthusiastic members of Codependents Anonymous. We're here today to talk about relationships. And just to give you a little bit of background, a little over 17 years ago, I got to my first CODA meeting, and I walked into that meeting with my life pretty much burnt to the ground. There wasn't a single piece of my life that I could point at to say that, at least things are going okay over here. I was a workaholic who was on the verge of getting fired from the place where he was a partner, which takes some doing, I want to tell you. I had these 3 kids who were terrified of me because I would come home and I would scream at them. And the reason I would scream at them was because I couldn't talk to the her in my life. And I was married to this angry little brunette who just refused to be happy, no matter how hard I tried to make her be happy. And so, work, family, marriage, everything was just falling apart. And so I had a nervous breakdown. I ended up on the couch of a therapist who had the good sense to realize what he was dealing with. And he said, there's some people I want you to go see. And he sent me to CODA. And a little while after that, Karen also came in. And the way I like to describe it is when I first started in recovery, I was married to a woman who was actively praying for me to die. And since I didn't really want to live anymore, at least we had something in common. And today we get invited to give workshops on healthy relationships. First of all, that's a miracle. It takes a power far greater than anything I've got to make something like that happen. But secondly, we have to tell people we can't really do a workshop on healthy relationships because we don't really know anything about them. We would love to come and do a workshop on healthier, more loving relationships because that's something that we have some experience with. And what happened for us was that in early recovery, we were introduced to, independently, by the way, to the 12 traditions as tools for relationship, to the idea that if you scratch the surface on every single one of our 12 traditions, there's a spiritual principle underneath that serves as a tool and a guide for a different and better way to approach relationships. So if in CODA, the third tradition says that the only requirement for membership in CODA is a desire for healthy and loving relationships, then I would submit to you that the 12 traditions in Codependents Anonymous are even more important than the steps because they speak precisely to our reason for being here. That's the good news. Some of you I have bad news for because in a group this size, I guarantee there's some people who think like I did when I was new, which was when I was looking for the magic bullet, I would hear something like that and go, oh, great, I just need to study the traditions. I don't have to work those stupid steps. Well, the bad news is that as near as I can tell, the steps are a prerequisite. In 17 years, I've not seen anybody able to apply the traditions in a meaningful and sustainable way in their life unless they had first worked the 12 steps. So I would just encourage everybody, please get together with your sponsor, work the steps, and then embrace what we're going to talk about here today. And please understand something, we're not experts on the traditions. We're just people who care about them a lot and do our best to apply them in our lives. And we look at them as tools for relationship, not just with each other, but with everybody around us. In our family relationships, our work relationships, our friendships, and they make a difference everywhere. So we're not here today to tell you how to work the traditions in your relationships. What we're here to do is to try to demonstrate a different way of thinking about the traditions than you may have thought about before. And just to give you some examples of how you might be able to think about this and apply them in your lives. What happened was about 10 years ago, the Experience, Strength, and Hope group wanted to do a one-day mini retreat on the traditions. We'd just done one on the steps. It had been hugely successful and popular. So we wanted to do one on the traditions, but we wanted to do it with an emphasis on relationship. And it turned out that there wasn't a lot in the Coda literature about that perspective. So some of us sat down and we wrote a booklet. Actually, this was the original, the 12-piece Relationship Toolkit by the Experience, Strength, and Hope group of Codependents Anonymous. Since then, it has now become Coda Conference endorsed as of about 3-4 years ago, and is now available worldwide. And that is a pretty good snapshot of how we talk about the 12 traditions and how we it serves as a starting point for how we can apply them in our relationships. So everybody's with me so far? Okay. So what we're going to do here today is Karen and I are going to riff back and forth a little bit on each of the traditions. I think I'm going to talk about the odd numbered ones and she's going to talk about the even numbered ones mostly, but we'll have some stuff to add to each other. And at the end, we'll kind of open it up for discussion. But if somebody has a burning question in the meantime, feel free to raise a hand and we will do our best to include you in the conversation. So tradition 1 says, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon Coda unity. And what's the spiritual principle that we're talking about in the first tradition? We're talking about the principle of unity, which sounds like a pretty good thing in relationships, doesn't it? We need to remember what we mean by unity. You know, unity does not mean uniformity. Does not mean that, as Karen and I have sometimes been accused of having a hive mind. What it means, unity is two people moving in the same direction together. We're not walking the same steps. My pace is quite a bit longer than Karen's, so I take fewer steps per minute, but we move in the same direction, often holding hands, by the way. The other way of thinking about that is the word harmony. Right? Harmony is not two people singing the same notes together. It's two people singing different notes to the same song together. And that's what we try to do. Now, when we consider that question of unity, and this is where my personal approach to the traditions comes in, is I try to boil them down to these litmus test questions that I can use to check my decisions and my actions. So when I'm contemplating a choice, the question that I need to ask myself is, does this thing that I propose to do promote or undermine unity? Does it promote feelings of unity on my partner's part, or does it push her away? Conversely, does it promote feelings of disunity or unity on my part? You know, some of us will have those things that we don't want our partner to know what we're doing. So we keep those little secrets. Well, I don't know about you, but if I'm keeping that kind of a secret, sooner or later I have to find a way to make it her fault. And it creates that space between us, even though she's not doing anything different. It's also a question of recognizing the difference between my wants and my needs. Right? In any relationship, our needs need to be met. If I have needs relevant to a specific relationship, they have to be met or that relationship's going to fail. But embracing tradition one reminds me that sometimes the needs of the relationship, if that relationship is important to me, the needs of the relationship trump my wants, right? A case in point might be, we need to invest a bunch of money in something for our house. I want to spend a bunch of money on a new motorcycle. Can I recognize the difference between my needs and my wants? And it creates disunity when I insist on my wants over the needs of the relationship. So that's what I've got so far.
Okay. The way I like to look at tradition one in terms of a visual for myself is that concept of the railway ties. So if I'm standing on a railway track and I look out into the distance, it looks as though the railway track is one thing. But if you look closer to your feet, you have separate rails. And that's the way I kind of like to look at unity within our relationship in particular, is I'm one rail and my significant other is that other rail. And we have the ties between those rails that actually bind us together. And the traditions and a number of other things are a lot of what binds us together. It doesn't mean that we are one. We are two very, very distinct individuals that work together to try and achieve a common direction. And that's one of the things I look at in terms of just a visual for me. And communication is key to working all of these traditions. So, any more comments on tradition one?
Just the tie into one of our slogans. It helps me to embrace that idea of how important is it? And that's not a dismissive question. It's an analytical question. I need to ask myself, how important is this particular issue to me or to us? If it's not important, then I can choose to let it go. If it is important, then I need to choose to pursue it or to reinforce it. But as long as I can keep that question in the back of my head, I've at least got a framework for determining a course of action.
Yeah. Another thing with unity is I find that unity, that concept of unity, runs throughout a lot of these traditions. And so when we're talking about the other traditions, it's going to come back to bringing in, incorporating unity, and the interconnectedness amongst these traditions is just amazing. So I'm going to actually go on to tradition two. And tradition two in Coda is, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority. A loving higher power is expressed to our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. Okay, so one of the things that Ritchard and I actually did a number of years ago is for our 10th wedding anniversary, we actually renewed our wedding vows. And we did that based on these traditions. We actually sat down and tried to reconfigure the way in which we wanted to relate to each other. And the 12 traditions was what actually proved to be the basis for our renewal of vows. And that concept of having a group conscience is very, very important. What we did for our, I got the wrong book here. Here it is, sorry. Tradition two for our marriage was, for the purpose of our marriage, there's but one ultimate authority, a loving higher power is expressed through our mutual conscience. Each of us is a trusted servant, and neither of us governs. Now, that's really important because the concepts in there are surrender and service. So we're looking at equality and participation. It's not at the group level, but also at a relationship level. And one of the things I have to remember is that in a particular relationship, who are the members of making a decision? Okay, who's important in that particular decision-making process? One of a good example that illustrates the concepts for me in this is something that we encountered a number of years ago. It's one of my favorite examples. You know, our daughter was just turning 15 at the time, and her birthday was coming up. Okay? And she came to me and she said, Mom, I know what I want for my birthday. I said, what's that, darling? She says, well, I just want two things. I want growth hormones and I want a puppy. Right? And I go, growth hormones and a puppy. Well, honey, let's face it, you come from short people, and I don't want a dog. I don't want a dog. And she kind of went away. And so Ritchard came home, and I said, guess what your daughter wants for her 15th birthday? She wants growth hormones and a puppy. So my loving spouse went up to our child and said, honey, your mother says you'd like growth hormones and a puppy for your birthday. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to get you a puppy. I'm going to get you a puppy, and I'm going to put it out on the, it's going to be waiting for you on the porch or on the deck. And it's going to have a great big red bow around its neck. And when you get up in the morning on your birthday, and if it's not there, it's because your mother killed it. And I go, oh my God, right? No, this is crazy. And so we've been in program for a little bit, and it became evident to me that we needed to have a group conscience. And so one of the things that we had to look at is who gets to participate in this group conscience. No, I wanted to be the authority on this. I wanted to say, no, I don't, I tried to say, no, I don't want a dog. And I had very good reasons for not wanting a dog. But I'm not the only one who lived in that household. So I took a look at who was in the household. It was myself, my spouse, our daughter who was turning 15, and her older sister who lived there. And each of us would be affected by this particular decision. So we arranged a time for a family group conscience meeting. And everybody in that meeting had a right to voice and vote. And this ended up being I think it was it 2 or 4 hours? I don't know. If it was 2, it seemed like 4. But let me tell you, I tried to voice and I did. I had right to voice just as anybody else did. And I voiced why I did not want a dog. And everybody else had that as well. And we took breaks, we came back, and everybody had right to voice. We had right to voice and right to vote. And I was outvoted. It was 3-1. And we ended up actually having a dog, which I'm very, very grateful for, because I think it was my higher powers plan of making sure I was okay later on. But that idea of a group conscience meeting for your family or within a relationship in general, having equal voice and vote is very important.
Yeah. Tradition 2 is the one that tells me that I have the right to participate in decisions. And in fact, I have an obligation to participate in decisions. And what Tradition 2 has done is it's made me an active participant in my own life for the first time, because my approach was always, what do you want? Yeah. I was that kind of codependent.
Yeah, for the longest time in our relationship, I would hear Ritchard say, just give me a key to the house and tell me where we're living. That's all I really need to know. That was not a form of participation, right? So it was through program that began to change.
And today, as a consequence, I have opinions. I'm married to somebody who encourages me to have opinions. And I've learned that when we have a difference of opinion, there are ways of working that out. It's not the end of the world. Where my codependency had me believing that I wasn't entitled to, and it wasn't safe for me to have opinions. Another really good example of this for us was that some years ago, Karen was faced with a job opportunity to move from Saskatoon to Winnipeg. And this again occasioned a series of meetings of our mutual conscience, where we had to to consider what was involved there, and whether it was, and harkening back to tradition one, and what was good for the relationship as a whole in this decision. And ultimately, it comes down to one question. If the ultimate authority in our relationship is the will of a loving higher power, then that's the question that we need to ask ourselves. What does God think?
Yeah, that was a real interesting situation, just that ability to have those conversations together. Looking at if we're going to stay together and not have resentments on either part of this relationship, how are we going to do that? We really wanted this relationship to work, harkening back, as Ritchard said, to tradition one and unity. And if I just try to push my will through, it's going to break the relationship. It's going to have resentment. And if I just shut up and say nothing, if I don't bring this this opportunity forward and have the conversation, I knew that I was going to harbor resentment. We at least needed to have the conversation, and each of us needed to consult with our higher power in order to be able to move forward in those conversations.
So it's been my experience that there's two kinds of people in this world, those who make sweeping generalizations and those who don't. And it's been my experience that as codependents, a really common pattern is one that I lived. I want to be either in total control, or I want to have no control and you're in charge. No in between. I'm not interested in the middle. And what tradition 2 does is it encourages me to find that middle ground and to ask myself questions like, am I trying to be in charge? Or am I letting or manipulating someone else to be in charge? And it comes back to that question, what does God think? Are we done with 2?
Well, for this moment.
Okay. Moving on to tradition 3. The only requirement for membership in CODA is a desire for healthy and loving relationships. Tradition 3 speaks to the principle of inclusion in every 12-step fellowship. And by the way, one little piece of background that I missed at the beginning here that I usually talk about is where we get these 12 traditions from. They come to us from Alcoholics Anonymous, as does pretty much anything of value that we have. They were first introduced by Bill Wilson to the 1951 Alcoholics Anonymous General Service Conference, and he came up with them as a means of promoting harmony in AA. AA through the 1940s had experienced explosive growth, and as a consequence of that, there was problems cropping up here and there at the group level. And groups were falling apart, and people were going out and getting drunk. And he came up with these traditions as a way for AA groups to get together. And I like to say that in the 70 years or so since those were first introduced, I have yet to hear of anybody dying in a knife fight in an AA business meeting. That alone speaks to the power of these 12 traditions for helping very difficult people get along with each other. And so what the third tradition in every fellowship talks about is the membership requirement in that fellowship. And here, the only requirement for membership in CODA is a desire for healthy and loving relationships. And the spiritual principle of inclusion, the idea of removing anything but the most essential obstacles to membership in our fellowship. Anything extra becomes an unnecessary complication, becomes an obstacle. So we make it as simple as possible. I like to tell newcomers that, welcome to Codependents Anonymous. The only requirement for membership is a desire for healthy and loving relationships. If you want those, you are entitled to that chair. And there's nothing else that you have to do in order to be welcome here. You don't have to work with steps. You don't have to ask some nosy Parker to be your sponsor. You don't have to read the stupid literature. You don't even have to show up at the meetings if you don't want to. You certainly don't have to practice those boring sounding traditions that they insist on reading at the beginning of the meeting. You don't have to, any of it. If you want to get better, we recommend you do all those things, but you don't have to in order to be welcome as a member here. Well, that's the principle that we try to take to any relationship, is to identify what are the bottom line requirements, and beyond that, let it go. So for our marriage, for example, the only requirements for membership in our marriage are a desire to be in the marriage combined with the willingness to make it work. So that idea that in order for us to be able to get along and work on this marriage together, we both have to want to be here. I mean, if either one of us doesn't want to be here, what's the point in the first place? But that has to be combined with the willingness to actually put some effort into it, because relationships do take work. And if either one of us, even if both of us want to be here, if either one of us doesn't want to put out any effort in support of the marriage, chances are it's going to fail eventually. So that's what we try to bring to the party. So when we look at any relationship, though, we can be asking ourselves the questions like, this decision that I'm looking at, will it exclude someone unnecessarily or inappropriately? Or am I putting obstacles between me and the people around me? Because that's what I do when I add extra requirements. If I say, in order to be my friend, you have to like the same baseball team that I do. Well, now I'm cutting down on my potential pool of friends. I'm making it more difficult to be my friend. Is that anything there?
A couple of things. With this particular concept or tradition 3, this is frequently one of those things that comes up in conversations with sponsees, particularly when they're in a new relationship or having challenges within a relationship. So it's something that we get to talk about a lot, is what are the requirements in order to be in a relationship? And as Ritchard mentioned, the only really real requirements are two people who want to be in the relationship and have a desire to make it work. And frequently what you'll end up with is one person who really wants to be in the relationship and is willing to make it work, and they will try and do the entire work of two people in the relationship and become exhausted. I mean, if you're a good codependent, that seems to be one of the requirements or things that we tend to do is try and do the work of two people. And that is exhausting. And it leads to a greater, it leads us more into our sickness, right? And that's why these traditions are so important. But just being able to say to somebody, you know, you need to have two people who truly want to be in that relationship and have a willingness to make it work. And then we say, well, what does that look like? And there are some commitments and such that we actually will be talking about. You know, I'm not sure if we talk about that one and this one are right away. It's a good time to do it. You want to talk about the 4 commitments? Yeah. Sure. So part of the wanting to be in a relationship and willingness to make it work, there's a number of different commitments. And the first one that Ritchard and I discovered and truly started trying to practice, you know, to the limited abilities that we had at the time, was that there's 4 commitments that it must exist between the two of us. First of all, I must be dedicated to my own spiritual growth, and another separate commitment, I must also be dedicated to that of my partner's spiritual growth. Conversely, he has to be dedicated to his own spiritual growth and also must be dedicated to my spiritual growth. And that covers a lot of ground. I've come to actually believe that there's 2 more commitments that we need to add to that. And a second commitment would be we need to be dedicated to continuing to practice communication skills. And we also need to be committed to creative problem-solving skills. If we have those within a relationship where we want to be here, we're willing to make it work, we're dedicated to both our own and our other partners' spiritual growth, commitment to communication and problem solving, we have a pretty good chance of making it. But we each need to take those items seriously. One person can't do the relationship work for both parties.
And this is a great example of where, in that principle of unity, we don't have to be identical. Because I look at what Karen, and we've talked about this over the last couple of months, that I see what she just said a little bit differently. I come back to those 4 original commitments. I have to be committed to my growth. I have to be committed to her growth. She has to be committed to her growth. She has to be committed to my growth. And I see those commitments to create a problem solving and communication as being part of that, not separate from. And it's okay that we think differently about that.
I encourage.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So I think that covers us for tradition 3. You want to go on with 4?
Sure. Tradition 4. Each group should remain autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or CODA as a whole. So the spiritual principle in tradition 4 is autonomy. So we'll ask questions such as, whose problem is this, or whose decision is this to make? You know, in groups, it's relatively clear that each group has a right and an obligation to actually decide how it wants to run the group. I mean, we have to take into consideration the foundational documents, etc. But each CODA group has the right to set the flavor for its particular meeting. And if you go to different CODA meetings, you're going to find a little bit of different flavor in each of those groups, and that's great. And the same is true in our personal relationships. I like to think of tradition 4 for myself is, you know, when you skip a rock on the water, you'll end up with ripples. And at the very center of that is the first ripple, and then you have, it ripples out, right? And at the very center of that for me is myself. And then the next ripple out from that is my partner. And then perhaps our family, and then perhaps our families of origin, and then the wider community, and it just keeps going out. And I have to remember that, because I have every right and responsibility to make decisions for myself. And I am autonomous. I can make an autonomous decision right up until it impacts another person. And in my personal life, the other person it frequently impacts first is my spouse. So, for example, when Ritchard and I were looking at moving to Winnipeg, that original decision or thought came to me, right? It was, would you like to move to Winnipeg because there is this job opportunity? Well, you know what? I absolutely could have accepted that job opportunity without speaking to my spouse. I could have. I have that right. Except that I had to also look at unity and how it impacted my spouse.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't have been good for the relationship.
Probably would not have been good for the relationship, right? So because of that, you know, I brought that to my spouse because it impacted him. It impacts his life incredibly. So we got to have those conversations. And at that particular time, we didn't have our kids living with us anymore, right? There were other people beyond us that wanted and thought they should have right to voice in that autonomous decision. Our families of origin. I heard my mother say, your father is in tears. You know, he believes he'll never see you again. We had people in our CODA groups in Saskatoon and our personal lives that said, you can't move to Winnipeg. You know, you can't move to Winnipeg. It's like, well, actually, we can, you know, and it was who actually is impacted by this particular decision. We have a right to make an autonomous decision right up until it impacts somebody else. And in that case, it was myself and my spouse that had a right to make that decision. Would you like to carry on with that?
Sure. It's that idea that your right to wave your fist ends where my nose begins. Right? Until such point as your autonomous actions have the potential to injure me, then that's where autonomy ends. And it's really important for us to have a look at this from the perspective of sure, those people are entitled to an opinion, but do they get a vote? And if they're not directly affected, then they really aren't entitled to a vote. When we went through the crisis that first brought us to recovery, the way I describe that is my world had shrunk to me and the woman who was the center of my obsessions, and she was making arrangements to leave. And she decided to stay. At the very last minute, she decided to stay, which was a huge disappointment to pretty much all of her family. And the fact that I insisted on staying was a huge disappointment to pretty much all of my family. So you couldn't really find anybody on the landscape who thought us staying together was a good idea. Mm-mm. And a lot of people were very angry with us for a very long time.
And shared their opinions.
But they didn't get a vote because they weren't directly affected by our autonomous decision.
Actually, I want to say something else on Tradition 4. I have a right to make a decision for myself, as we've mentioned, right up until it impacts somebody else. And I also have to respect the fact that other people have that same right. So my spouse, for example, likes to ride motorcycles. And I think that's fabulous. I've actually had people say to me, "You let Ritchard have a motorcycle?" And it's, why would I, that's not my autonomous decision. He has, it doesn't impact me, right? And when Ritchard goes out and rides his motorcycle and comes back and looks so happy, just like my dog after a good run.
It's part of my spiritual practice.
It's part of it, right? Who am I to try and take that away? That would be trying to control. And it doesn't impact me in the same way. So I have to allow other people the right to their autonomy. And sometimes I might not like what they actually decide, which has happened as well. And I have to learn how to shut up if it does not impact me. This is their autonomous decision. And who am I to say this isn't exactly what they need to do in order to become the person that their higher power has intended them to come?
So the litmus test questions we might ask ourselves there is, whose decision is it? Or failing that, whose problem is it? That takes us to Tradition 5. Each group has but one primary purpose: to carry its message to other codependents who still suffer. I'm going to back up for just a second. One of the things that's significant about Tradition 4 for me has to do with the fact that it's the first one that made sense to me. A lot of people approach this from the perspective of, okay, if I learn to apply these in the traditions, then I can open them up and take them out into the wider world and apply them in my relationships. You know what I found? It actually worked better for me the other way. Tradition 4 was the first one that made sense to me from the point of view of, wait a second, I'm autonomous. I get to make decisions about my own life. That was news to me. And it suddenly made sense to me then that if I can do that, then we as a group can do that in the CODA group. And I started being able to understand these principles at the personal level and apply them better at the group level. So in Tradition 5, we talk about the spiritual principle of a primary purpose. Why don't you just think about something for a second? If you can identify the purpose in any activity, in any endeavor that you engage in, and if you can focus on doing the things that support that purpose and stop doing the things that undermine that purpose, what happens to your efforts? Do they not become considerably more effective? Another way to think about that is if you look back in your life, if you could have made every decision that you ever made based on your long-term best interest, what would your life look like today? Kind of mind-blowing to think about that, isn't it? Because as a codependent, I made a lot of short-term decisions to decisions that were intended to fix my feelings in that moment, but without regard to what the consequences would be. But in any activity, whether it's work or family or a marriage or the Lakota group, if I can do the things that support the purpose of that relationship tends to be more successful. If I can stop doing the things that get in the way of the purpose of that relationship, then it becomes more successful. So in our marriage, what we talk about is our marriage has but one purpose: to serve as an expression of our higher power's love. We do this by practicing the 12 steps, by encouraging and nurturing each other's growth, and by welcoming and loving our friends and family. That, when the last 2 times that we renewed our wedding vows, that was our declaration of our primary purpose as a couple. But here's the thing: we can say it and just do lip service, or we can actually factor that into our decisions. So if that's going to factor into our decision, it's going to enter into decisions like what kind of house we buy. So we buy houses that have a 5th step room. If you want, later we can take you on a video tour of our house and show you our 5th step room. Because we engage actively in fellowship within our recovery, we host a lot of potluck suppers. So we need a potluck space. Because we dance, we need a dance floor. Same room serves both purposes. And we can show you that later if you want. But the last 3 houses that we have bought have all had those facilities. We need a place that is warm and welcoming. And people walk into our houses and go, wow, this really feels warm and welcoming. Because that is part of our purpose as a couple.
Yeah, and that actually came about through trying to work through what these traditions meant to us. What did we want our purpose to be? And I would encourage anybody that's in a long-term relationship or otherwise to actually consider what the purpose of the relationship is and to phrase it for yourself. So when we came up with the wording for ourselves, yes, we actually, we do look at buying houses in this way, because it is what we believe our higher power wants is to take our environment and to extend it, right? So we have, as Richard mentioned, we have a 5th step room. We have a place where sponsees sometimes have a hard time writing inventory. So we have a desk area where if they want to, they can come over and they can spend time with us doing that.
Oh, and because in our circles, we periodically have people who, for one reason or another, cannot be at home that night.
Yeah.
And often on short notice. We have a very comfortable guest room. Yeah. That the agreement between us is that anybody can move into that room for 2 days. Yeah. On no notice. All they've got, we don't have to inform each other under those circumstances. It's just there in case somebody needs it. But this is an expression of who we are and what we try to do as a couple. And it furthers our purpose. And speaking of the house thing, and this dovetails back to the second tradition, because what happens when we're looking for a house like that, realtors look at you a little funny. Yeah. And sometimes you got to be patient. And while you're shopping around houses looking for all these very particular requirements. And it's an expression of the 3rd step, turning our will and our lives and where we're going to live over to the care of a loving higher power. And what we did was we took the 3rd step together in every instance, asking a loving higher power to show us where he wanted us to live. Mm-hmm. And that has brought us to the exact correct house 3 times in a row.
It's amazing if you actually ask for the blessed or block it prayer on a decision too. Dangerous prayer. Dangerous prayer. Yeah, blessed or block it. we had actually gone out to purchase a home. We had discussed between the two of us that yes, this house met the criteria. We prayed together and we said, God, bless this or block it. You know, if this is the house that you intend us to have, bless it or block it. And my goodness, we received such great service on that. That house was sold out from under us within 2 hours of having said the prayer. It happened more than once. It was amazing.
And it had been on the market for 6 months.
Yeah. So it was completely amazing. So it's not as though we have a ton of money to go out and buy houses, but if we turn over what we do have and say, God, this is your stuff. This is your home. We are trying to be a servant of your greater peace. Show us what you need us to do. So tradition 6?
Tradition 6.
Okay. Since I can't read properly. Tradition 6, a quota group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the quota name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary spiritual aim. So the principle behind this particular tradition is focus. Now, it actually helps us to focus on our primary purpose that we have identified in tradition 5. And one of the big things that I have to remember is I can't speak for a group. Like I can't speak for quota, and I can't speak for anybody else in a relationship. Our dog is growling. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Hope not. One of the things that I have to remember is that an outside commitment should not get in the way of our relationship focus. Now, I have a couple of examples to help try and clarify that. So if we have, for example, family funds, right? I don't have a right to make a decision for Ritchard strictly based on what I want to do, right? It would be wrong of me to go out and buy a car without prior consultation. I have no right to make a commitment for Ritchard. Now, this is news to me because before CODA, what I would do is, Ritchard's a bit of a computer geek, and I would volunteer his computer services to anybody who truly asked. You know, a lot of our family members and such would make arrangements for Ritchard's services through me without consultation of him at all. Or I would perhaps agree to have the two of us attend family dinners without telling him about it. It was committing him without prior consultation. So we try and do that a bit differently now. Again, we bring in unity and group conscience and autonomy and those traditions as well. For example, if we, I was just thinking of that, Ritchard's ability to do computer work. It took a while for, I try not to commit my spouse anymore to things that he has not agreed to without prior consultation. So with my family members, it has taken years of me saying to them, no, I can't say whether or not Ritchard can fix your computer or how to do something. And you know what? I'm not willing to ask him. How about you need to make those arrangements directly through Ritchard? And so many times I have received emails or phone calls. Well, do you think Ritchard could do this for me? It's like, no, I can't speak to Ritchard's commitment, his time and his resources. You need to do that directly with him. Because by committing him to something without his prior consultation, it actually brings up animosity between the two of us and resentment. I have a particular sister who actually believes that you know, it's a good idea to make decisions and to tell your spouse that this is the way it's going to be. And I used to do that as well. You know, it doesn't have to just be in funds or time. One of the things years ago that I was looking at doing was getting new dining room chairs. Okay, and this, if I'm going to be purchasing something, if we need something for our home that is something that's going to be around, even if it's inexpensive, but it's going to be around for a long period of time and is right there, my spouse should actually be involved in that decision. So for these dining room chairs, I found some red chairs on sale. And I was shopping with my sister, and my sister said to me, Karen, just buy the chairs. It's exactly what you need. And it's like, no, I have to speak with Ritchard first. And she's going, why would you have to speak with him? Just bring him home and tell him he's going to love them. And I'm going, I don't have that right. You know, it might not be a tremendous amount of money because they really were on a good sale. So it's only a couple $100 for like 4 chairs or whatever it was. But, you know, it was something completely different. They were very red. And I actually have a right to bring something into our home and say to my spouse, this is going to be here with, you know, suck it up, you'll learn to love them. So what we actually ended up doing is I sent photos, and we had that conversation, much to my sister's dismay. But we had the conversation between Ritchard and myself as to whether or not we even wanted to bring stuff like chairs into our home.
Yeah, I mean, the rule between us is that Karen can do whatever the heck she wants in her den.
Mm-hmm.
I can do whatever the heck I want in my den.
And is encouraged.
And the rest of the house is a mutual decision. And tradition 6 really comes down to this idea that I can't speak for us. I can't speak for us. And I definitely can't speak for you. Mm-hmm. And this dovetails with our primary purpose, with the idea that the main thing is to remember to keep the main thing, so that we don't get distracted by issues of money, property, and prestige, because that tends to be where money, property, and ego, because that tends to be where things go sideways in any relationship. Okay. Are we good? Sure. There? Okay, tradition 7 says that every code of group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. And the spiritual principle of being self-supporting, the spiritual principle of responsibility. And it's the idea that well, this is the tradition that encourages me to be a grown-up, and to act like it. So, see, all my life, my problems always looked either boring or insurmountable, one of the two, and like not something I was terribly interested in touching. Your problems look real easy. Let me jump in there and solve that for you. But with my problems, I just want to sit on the floor in a heap and wait for some enabler to come along and solve them for me. And that was the way I lived my life. And tradition 7 says, Ritchard, you see those people over there? Let them have their problem and let them solve their own problem their way. Oh, and by the way, this stuff over here, this is your responsibility. Be a grown-up and deal with your stuff. That's tradition 7 at work in my life. Want to add anything to that?
Oh, of course I want to add to that.
Of course you do.
Of course I do. So tradition 7, as Ritchard just said, I like to think of it as becoming more emotionally mature. Now, I have some phrases that come to mind that for myself that I use regularly with myself, and they're really boring, right? Stuff such as, Karen, if you want to get off the couch, you got to, you know, if you want to cross the room, you got to get off the couch. I actually have to take responsibility for a number of different things in my life. I'd love to be able to be a princess. I never wanted to be the queen, right? I want to have things given to me, and I don't want to do the work for them. That's not very emotionally mature. And it's very, well, it just isn't. So, you know, being emotionally supporting, being fully self-supporting includes being emotionally self-supporting, physically self-supporting, spiritually self-supporting, and financially self-supporting. And that can mean different things in different contexts. You know, if you want to cross the room, get off the couch. If I want to actually get into shape, I can't expect anybody else to exercise for me. If I want to change my eating habits, I have to take responsibility for what goes in my own mouth. I know this sounds basic, but sometimes basic things aren't very basic to me. Common sense isn't very common. And I also have to allow other people to be fully self-supporting. And there are 4 questions that we will ask frequently in order to help understand whether or not, we get invited to help other people a lot. I'm sure you do too. We get invited into somebody else's problems or situations. And before I just jump in there and actually start to help, I have to ask myself some questions because, am I helping or am I enabling? So some of the questions when I'm looking at about fully self-supporting is, did the other person ask for help? Is it necessary that I actually help somebody else? Will my help be appreciated? And can I afford to do this physically, emotionally, spiritually, or financially? So one of the best examples that came to my mind this morning when I was thinking about this was that same daughter who wanted the puppy for her 15th birthday had decided that she should hitchhike independently across Canada to Vancouver. And that was an interesting period in my life, at least, and I know it was in hers as well. And when she got there, she said, she phoned after a while and said, Mom, I want to come home now. Will you please send me a plane ticket? And one of the things that program has taught me is not to say yes or no immediately. A good idea is to say, I'm going to need to think about that. And one of the things in this question, in that question that she had posed to me, was that the funds that she wanted to use, or wanted me to use, or was asking me to use, wasn't just my funds. It was family funds of myself and Ritchard. And therefore, I didn't have a right, again, to make that decision independently without consultation. So I said, honey, I'll have to think about that and I'll get back to you. And in the meantime, I asked myself those 4 questions again, and Ritchard and I asked them together. Did they ask for help? Did Lindsay ask for help? Yes, she did. Was it necessary, or is this something that she can do for herself? That was an interesting one in this particular situation. Will it be appreciated? Well, that was questionable at the time. And can we afford to do this physically, financially, spiritually, and emotionally? So financially, yes, we could have afforded it. That wasn't a huge issue. Will it be appreciated? And she got there all by herself. She truly did. And in order to be fully self-supporting in this one, we came to that decision that it wouldn't be a long-term, a good decision for us to actually just say, here's some money, come on home. What we ended up doing in that particular situation was saying, emotionally for me anyway, it wasn't good just to give her the money because I would end up with resentment. If I gave her the money and she used it for something else, that was with strings attached, and I would be resentful. So what the 2 of us had agreed was that we would give our daughter an early birthday present of a certain amount of money, and she could do with that whatever she so chose to do. And I could I could go back over those 4 questions and be clean on that. So did she ask for help? Yes. Was it necessary, or is it something that she could do for herself getting back home? She's a very creative young woman. It wasn't really necessary. Would it be appreciated? Questionable. And I knew I couldn't afford to do it emotionally because I would be resentful.
So again, there was a request in the chat to restate those questions. So those questions are, did they ask? Right? As codependent, I want to be helpful, and sometimes I'm helping all sorts of places where nobody's even considered asking me. Mm-hmm. So did they ask? Will it be appreciated? Is it necessary? So is it necessary, or is it something they can and should be doing for themselves? And 4th, can I afford it? Financially, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, at all of those levels. This is a series of questions that are just tailor-made, I think, for those of us with codependence, because they're a way of looking at those opportunities to help that just put the brakes on a little bit. maybe time to take a break for 10 minutes. Okay, after we're done talking about 7, we'll take a break.
I think that was pretty much
Okay.
most of 7.
Well, the only thing that I wanted to add there is that in addition to being physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually self-supporting, responsible for myself, I am also encouraged to let someone else be responsible in that way. So the litmus test questions of, am I allowing someone to do for me what I can and should do for myself? And am I doing for someone else something that they can and should be doing for themselves? Am I interfering with someone else's growth by being too helpful? And the other area that I've been contemplating lately is realizing that, as part of all of this being self-supporting, I have a responsibility in being self-supporting for speaking up. Okay, and this again dovetails back to tradition 2, where I have an obligation to participate in those discussions. But if something is bothering me, I have a responsibility to speak up. I can't put it on that other person to read my mind. I don't know about the rest of you, but they took away my mind reading license when I came to CODA, because apparently I wasn't very good at it. So that's about what we have to say on Tradition 7. If we want to take a 10-minute comfort break, it's 3:21. We'll reconvene at 3:31. That's Saskatchewan time, so it's
Whatever your time is.
2:21 and 2:31.
Okay. Continue?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Sure.
great.
So we're all ready to talk about Tradition 8, last I heard. That seem fair?
I think that seems fair.
Okay.
Okay, we'll talk about Tradition 8.
Tradition 8 says that Codependents Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. Tradition 8 represents one of my pet peeves in meetings, because we hear a lot of sharing in meetings on Tradition 8, where people are talking about how great it is that we're all nobody here is a professional and we're all equal, and so on and so forth, and we leave any professional affiliations outside the door, which is all great and it's all true, but that's not what Tradition 8 is about. That's what Tradition 2 and 6 are about. 2 is about the fact that we're all equal. 6 is about leaving our outside affiliations outside of the relationship, or outside the group, or outside the door of the meeting room. And this is not a case of 2 + 6 = 8. When Bill Wilson set out the 12 traditions, he wasn't trying to do a bunch of duplication. He was trying to present 12 separate spiritual ideas. And what he was talking about in Tradition 8 was non-professional in the sense that we don't get paid. That nobody here helps other codependents for a living. That the love and the welcome and the help that we show that still suffering newcomer is something that we offer for fun and for free, without a price tag attached to it. And the spiritual principle in Tradition 8 is unconditional love, which, I don't know about you guys, but that was kind of a novel concept to me when I got to CODA, because I hadn't experienced it in a very, very long time. What happened to me was at the end of my first meeting, they hugged me and they told me they wanted me to come back next week, despite the fact that I had cried like a little girl all the way through the meeting. And so there wasn't any requirement other than the fact that they loved me for me to come back and be loved more. That's what hooked me into coming back, was the unconditional love. And as I said, this was a foreign idea to me. And what Tradition 8 has taught me is a different perspective on love. The idea that real love is always unconditional. That, see, when I got here, I thought how much you loved me depended entirely on how much I pleased you. I thought that love always had some kind of a price tag on it. And it was even something as simple as telling my wife that I loved her, right? I don't know if you guys have ever played this game, but to say to somebody, I love you, well, that's not an expression of feeling. That's not a statement of fact. What that is that's a fishing expedition, right? Because when I say, I love you, what do I want? I want to hear it back. And if I don't hear it back in my codependence, I'm due for anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks of obsession over the fact, right? That was the way I lived. Today, when I tell somebody in my life that I love them, I'm giving them a piece of information I want them to have. I'm telling them how I feel. Nothing more. If I happen to hear it back, that's a bonus, that's great, but it is not a requirement. And that is the key to Tradition 8, is, am I putting a price tag on doing the kind and loving thing? And by the way, if we're going to put a price tag on love, how expensive am I willing for it to get? Do you want to add to that?
With Tradition 8, that concept of somebody such as my spouse saying, I love you, and nowadays, after being in recovery for this amount of time, when he says, I love you, every once in a while, I just so thoroughly enjoy saying, I know, and it's really kind of fun because I don't need to say I love you back. I might, I do, but just that I know you do. And to actually mean that from my soul, because, before recovery, when I heard I love you and that anticipation of, I'm supposed to say this back. And, when you want to kill somebody and you're hoping they die, it's really hard to say I love you and mean it. Right. So this idea of the traditions have changed who we are together. And when I hear I love you, I can say in all sincerity, I know, and I love you too. It's a completely different ballgame. This is the tradition that really allows us in a sponsor-sponsee relationship to do the 12-step work that we do. It's for fun. It's for fun and for free. It's to be able to listen to our sponsees and allow them to be who they are unconditionally, and not try and control them and tell them what they do or how to be. But to gently guide them in the 12 steps as we have been taught, and to hear their experience, strength, and hope, and to change our perspective as well, and to grow from each other. That's the whole, I love that idea that this is non-professional. I'm not a professional, and trust me, this is this is one of those situations where I'm really glad I'm not. I get to participate full-heartedly in someone else's recovery, in my sponsee's recovery, and they get to participate in mine. And it's a wonderful relationship. What I was actually thinking of an example of Tradition 8 from a personal perspective. I really need to look at this as no strings attached, for fun and for free. Years ago, I had a sister who was going through a really tragic situation. I mean, there was a lot of drama and pain going on in their lives. And I so truly, as an individual, I wanted to express my love for her. And I really wanted her to have a symbol of hope. So what I did is I canvassed the family on my side, as well as another side of the family, to raise funds and to get a piano, because they really wanted a piano. And I thought, well, if they had this piano, they would have some hope in their life at this time. Now, that sounds like a ridiculous idea today, right? When I gave them, like when this piano was given to them, it was, that's nice. Well, it was, I was really, my bubble was burst. I had strings attached and I didn't even know I did. I really have to look at my motivation for giving somebody a gift. I really have to do that. Am I giving somebody a gift for fun and for free? And if I'm giving somebody a gift, I just need to be able to give it as a gift. And if they If they accept it, great. And if they choose to dispose of it, great. But I need to be able to give gifts for fun and for free, to look at my motives behind the giving.
I think it's important to remember too that love does not have to mean approval.
Yeah.
You know? And it dovetails with tradition 5. The primary purpose in my relationship with every sponsee I have is to enhance both our recovery. Nowhere in there does it say that I have to like that sponsee or that they have to like me. My job as a sponsor is to love them enough to share what I have and tell them the truth. That's it. And as a result, I get to sponsor some people that I wouldn't sit down and have coffee with otherwise. And that's, not only is that okay, but that's good for my recovery. It helps me to learn patience and tolerance with some people who are more difficult than normal for me. That is a terrific gift. So unconditional love is the only real love. Now, I should have let you go first on tradition 8.
Oh, that's okay. Tradition 9.
Tradition 9, CODA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible for those they serve. And what we're talking about here is the spiritual principle of flexibility or adaptability. Or to think of it from the contrary perspective, what we're trying to avoid is rigidity. And I don't know about you, but in my codependence, I was very rigid. Everything was black or white. I said before, I'm not a middle ground guy. I live in the extremes left to my own devices. You know, and for me to find the middle requires a program of recovery and the supervision of a loving sponsor and a relationship with a higher power. And then maybe I've got a shot at finding that middle ground of realizing that in between black and white, there's not only all those shades of gray, but all the colors of the rainbow. And that's where real life happens. Left to my own device, I'm going to go from all the way in to all the way out until that gets uncomfortable. And then I'm all the way in again. And when that gets uncomfortable, I go back to the other extreme. And I would do that again and again and again and again, living in the absolutes. Turns out that when I adopt a little bit of flexibility, when I engage in a little bit of adaptation, the world gets so much bigger. And that has been extremely rewarding. So I need to ask myself questions like, am I keeping an open mind? Am I allowing myself room to grow? Am I allowing others room to grow? Tradition 9 teaches me, you know, at the group level, we talk about Tradition 9 from the perspective of rotation of service. The idea that when we have trusted servant in a position of service, we let them have that job until they start getting good at it. And then we fire them and put somebody else in there, right? So that we're always having this rotation of leadership. And because that encourages growth, because that encourages new thinking and an open mind. The most deadly thing in the world to me is someone asks the question, why do we do it that way? And the answer being, because that's the way we've always done it. Like, that says to me that we don't understand why we do it that way. We don't think about why we do it that way. And maybe, even if there is a better way, we're never going to encounter it that way. It also speaks to the idea that nobody owns a job. I don't know if you've ever seen a group where somebody has been president for life, or if you wandered into one of those groups where somebody goes, "Oh, that's Fred's group. Fred runs that group." Well, that's probably a group that I don't want to go to on a weekly basis, if that's the case, because nobody owns the group. The same holds true with tasks around the house, for example. Most of the time in our household, I mow the lawn, but Karen is perfectly free to do that if she wants. In our own marriage, where did that sheet go? Oh, there it is. I put a little thought into this. I do know them by heart, but I just want to make sure that I'm accurate with you. Our marriage as such ought never be organized, but we may temporarily appoint one or the other to special tasks as they suit our interests and talents. That's the way we adapt that for our marriage. The idea being that one or the other of us can take the lead in a particular enterprise, but neither of us is the boss, and certainly not in perpetuity. So I've temporarily been the computer guy for, I don't know, 20 years. But at the point where if Karen wants to learn this stuff, at one time I would have been threatened by that, and today I wouldn't be. So you want anything there?
Yeah.
I bet you do.
I bet I do. Yeah, with respect to Ritchard being the special worker with computer tasks, I actually at one point in time really wanted to learn how to do a variety of stuff on a computer. I did. And I would spend like 3-4 hours doing, like, just trying to learn something. And one day, I call it, quotes unquote, a spiritual awakening. I realized, why am I doing this? I'm spending 4 hours trying to do something that takes Ritchard 15 minutes, like really 15 minutes. And so if I married a computer geek, why not allow him the opportunity to serve our relationship through that? And, he gets a thrill out of it, and I'm okay with that. So when we're looking at flexibility and adaptability, I see this all the time in the meetings I attend, right? It's often we'll come to a meeting and nobody's signed up to be the chair. So it's, this could be a great disaster, or we could just say, hey, somebody want to take this and do this? It doesn't take that much effort. And trying to encourage our newcomers to actually put their name forward, chair a meeting. If you're a little bit scared, that's okay. That's how we grow. We push our comfort zones just a little bit. And you know what? You don't have to do this stuff alone either. And somebody from that has more experience is more than willing, especially in a physical meeting, to sit next to you and just to give you that comfort. Or we'll be there with you in a virtual meeting to the best of our ability. And I hosted a couple of meetings, was the technical host, and I messed up tremendously. And I can either take that as an, oh my God, I messed up, these people won't love me, I can never go back to that meeting again. And trust me, at one time I probably would have done that. Or I can learn how to laugh at myself. And if I can learn how to laugh at myself and say, you know what, I messed up, I'm sorry, but that's okay, this is what we do. And if I can laugh at myself, I have found that it gives other people permission to laugh at themselves. And I'm pretty funny. On a regular basis, watching myself mess up is kind of entertaining once I get over the fact that I'm trying to control everything and I think I should be perfect. That idea of perfectionism has to go. And tradition 9 helps me to relax a little bit, to be a little bit more flexible. And it actually encourages active participation, not only in the group, but also in relationships. Ritchard talked about the rotation of duties. And we actually, again, this brings in so many other traditions. In our marriage, we'll have business meetings as to, what kind of chores do we want to do for the next while? Maybe we need to change things up a bit. Maybe somebody's been the special worker on something a little bit too long and they would like to try something else. And we can do stuff like that and not take our lives quite as seriously as we used to. So that's all I'm going to say on tradition now.
Okay. Flexible and adaptable.
Yes.
Okay. You want to talk about tradition 10?
Sure. Tradition 10. Coda has no opinion on outside issues, hence the Coda name ought never be drawn into public controversy. So we have a couple of different spiritual principles behind this one. There's clarity, there's simplicity, and for me, there's also harmony in Tradition 10. So when I look at Tradition 10, any issue or problem that is not essential to our primary purpose is an outside issue. There's lots of different controversial issues that really could destroy a group. I'm so grateful that CODA doesn't have opinions on political parties or whether or not people should be wearing masks due to COVID or so many different things. You know, that's something that really could destroy the unity that we have within groups. So CODA as a whole doesn't have opinions on outside issues. And that same concept can apply to personal relationships. Anything that is an outside issue to my relationship with a spouse, you know, I need to be able to recognize those things. We mentioned previously that when we made that very conscious decision to stay together as a couple, our families were not happy. They weren't happy at all. And it really, there were some relationships that got very badly damaged during that time period. And I can't say that to this day, they're still not 100% great, but they're better. So I have this, I have a particular brother-in-law that's not exactly, I don't think we're best buddies, okay?
He is a walking controversial outside issue.
Okay, but he's you know, he's my spouse's brother. I don't really care for him, but that doesn't mean that my spouse can't have a relationship with his brother. I have a brother-in-law on my side that, and a sister that I can honestly say that is not Ritchard's favorite people. And when we first got into program, I insisted, get that one, I insisted that he like my sister and my other brother-in-law. And that I didn't know if this relationship could continue unless he fixed his relationships with my relatives. Well, thank God for this tradition. Like really, my sister and my brother-in-law are an outside issue to our relationship. And you know, his relationship with each of them is his relationship with each of them. And I can honestly say that my relationship with his brother would have been a much, much better relationship if he would have stayed out of our relationship. And those are relationships that are still healing because we put our family members in the center of our relationship and they had no right to be there. It wasn't fair to them. It wasn't fair to us. They were an outside issue to our relationship.
And I mean, as an aside, all of those relationships are imperfect, but better today than
Way
they
better.
were.
Absolutely.
So in Tradition 10, we want to look at, am I bringing in or reacting to issues that aren't connected to the problem at hand or to the relationship under consideration? More importantly, it's that idea of, you know, do I insist that the people I'm in relationship agree with me? That is really what we're talking about here. And the question is, can I learn to disagree agreeably? Can I, you know, I guess we're just going to have to disagree about that. Or the old recovery standby. You may be right. So I think we're done with Tradition 10.
Yeah, I just think of the calendar.
Tradition 11, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. And we're talking here about the spiritual principle of attraction or of example, right? In our marriage, the way we word that is our personal opinions should be communicated openly, honestly, and directly with respect and courtesy. We need always maintain personal humility in all our affairs. The idea that of example rather than than promotion is that we're going to show rather than tell. Albert Schweitzer was quoted as saying that in influencing others, example is not the most important thing, it's the only thing. Or as a very well-known member of AA put it, is that he went through life wanting other people to judge him by his intentions, and it turned out they were judging him by his actions. So attraction rather than promotion means that I don't want to tell you my beliefs, I'm going to show you my beliefs. I'm not going to tell you my values, I want to show you my values, and I want to be an example of them. And between us, that idea that if we are going to disagree or try to come to a decision, neither one of us engages in browbeating behavior or trying to control the other person's opinion. Instead, we try to communicate openly, honestly, directly, with respect and humility, and come away from that as an example of the will of a loving higher power. So when we talk about this, the questions we come back to are, what kind of example am I setting? Am I telling rather than showing? And that boils down to the simple question of, am I walking the talk? Am I being an example of these principles in my day-to-day life? In my interactions with my spouse, with my family, with the people at work, am I being the kind of man that I signed up to become? Because isn't that the end of the end goal for all of us in recovery? Right? Talk about it in the promises. That, I'm no longer controlled by my fears. I overcome my fears and act with courage, integrity, and dignity. My goal has always been to try to the best of my ability to become a man of courage, integrity, and dignity. Some days I'm a better example of that than others. Karen?
Yeah. When we were first entering into 12-step recovery programs, just pre to that, Ritchard mentioned that he had been sent to CODA, and I had this thing in my head. You know, he was telling me he wanted to do something differently. He was telling me he was going to be a different person. He was going to do something differently. And, you know, I had heard that for years. And I would see an effort for maybe 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks, and then everything would return back to normal, right? Normal, back into the dysfunction. And it was only when I saw Ritchard actually coming consistently to meetings, to actually continuing to try and practice the principles, that I didn't see a slip back into that old default behavior. And that's when I actually wanted to go to check this out myself. Because, you know, for years I had heard, and this is going to be different, but there was no action. You know, it was words, and it was words only. So this idea of attraction rather than promotion, it was what I started to see, even though I could see my spouse going through a lot of emotional pain, a lot of turmoil. It wasn't easy, but watching the integrity of which what was happening there, I thought, you know, there's something really, really powerful here. And that's really what initially attracted me to give the 12-step program a try, to really give it a try, and to see if maybe this thing had something in here for me. And through that, you know, I think a lot of us, when we first get into recovery, we try promotion rather than attraction. And of course, when I looked around my family, I know the family I come from, I truly do. And you know, we're we're not the healthiest litter that's out there. So I could see clearly, being, you know, of such great mind, that all the issues that my family had too. And I thought that, you know, they would greatly benefit from this program. And so I tried promotion rather than attraction. And after a while of getting frustrated, kind of gave that up, and really tried to incorporate the concepts of these traditions and the steps into my personal life. And you know, it has taken many years, but what I've come to see is family members starting to actually say, you know, maybe that there is something there. And our relationship, I'm going to tell you that our relationship was dead. When Ritchard said that he was married to this angry brunette that just wanted him dead, it's true. I really, when I first came here, I thought that if he just died, I would be better. You know, my life would be easier. And what I came to realize was that I really didn't want him dead. I just didn't want to live in the pain anymore. Our relationship was just too full of pain. And if we can get to the point where, you know, I was literally on my way out the door to sign papers to buy a house. I am so grateful today that I have the type of relationship I have. You know, is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it is so much better, and it's so much healthier. And there's so much hope in this program by working the steps myself, by taking the spiritual principles and trying to the best of my ability, one day at a time, to incorporate them into my life. There's hope. You know, we can change, and we can help. We can be examples for other people, not by saying, oh, I want to be an example, but by living this stuff. So that's what I have to say about that.
And just add to that, you know, that early program, I've seen the light, and who can I recruit out of my family?
Yeah.
And we both did that, and it didn't work with anybody.
No.
Didn't work. And we, over the years, settled into this routine of we're just living our life.
Yeah. We're
showing the effects of this program in our lives. And consequently, one of Karen's sisters and one of our nieces are now very active in Codependence Anonymous as a result of the example that they've seen in us, not because of anything that we tried to manipulate them into.
Okay, tradition 12.
Tradition 12.
So, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. And so the spiritual principles in this one are anonymity and selflessness. One of the things that I look at in here is I have to separate my feelings from the facts of a situation and identify the right course of action. A big part of this for me is that it's not all about me. You know, it's before program, everything was kind of, you know, being a self-centered and selfish individual. I tried to look at situations from my own perspective only. And now it's, you know, it's not all about me. So anonymity to me represents more or less the death of ego. I need to be able to give up what to die to myself in order to be able to actually be of use to a relationship. So part of that for me is, what is the loving thing to do? When I'm looking at a situation, I need to actually question, what is the loving thing to do? And frequently, the loving thing to do is not the kind and popular thing. When I have lots of situations in my life, again, when we're talking about the other traditions, we might be invited into a situation where, you know, my daughter asking for a plane ticket back from Vancouver. You know, the easy thing to do in that situation would have been to say, well, here's some money, come on home. You know, that struggling with the, is it the loving thing to do? Is it the right and kind thing to do? Lots of different scenarios go through my mind on that one. But in the end, you know, we together made the decision that no, that wasn't the kind and loving thing to do. And in the short term, it wasn't a popular decision. she wasn't really pleased, right? But it was the right decision for us, and in the long run, it was the right decision. It's that concept of sometimes it takes short-term pain for long-term gain. What is the kind and loving thing to do?
Yeah, caught up in my illness, my drug of choice is 5 minutes of someone else's approval. And so I will make the short-term decision every time when I'm caught up in my codependency. And this idea of sometimes the loving thing to do is to set a boundary. You know, how often do we tell newcomers, you cannot set a boundary and look after someone else's feelings at the same time? It cannot be done. But if I'm committed to that other person's growth, sometimes the appropriate and loving thing to do is to set a boundary. And this is the integral thing in Tradition 12, is to ask that question: what is the loving thing to do? And this dovetails with step 3. I think I've said here before that for me, step 3 is the program. It is the entire 12-step program in a nutshell. The purpose of the first 2 steps is to get me to that decision in the 3rd step. I make this decision, turn my will and my life over to a kind and loving higher power, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to implement that decision. And 4 through 12 are about teaching me to implement that decision. But if I'm making that decision to do the will of a kind and loving higher power, how would that kind and loving power have me be with his other kids, with the people around me? Well, he would have me be kind and loving. He would have me do the loving thing. So this is an expression of the 3rd step for me. That deal that I made with a loving higher power in step 3, that, you know, frankly, is the cornerstone of my life to the best of my ability. And so I need to look at those situations. And what the traditions do is they provide me a framework for considering whether what looks to my distorted vision like the kind and loving thing actually is.
I think for me, the traditions are a set of spiritual principles that encapsulate boundaries. So if we're looking for how do we apply boundaries in our daily lives, is to look at the spiritual principles in each of these traditions and actually apply those in all of our relationships, whether that be in a marriage, in our relationships at work, within our programs. It doesn't matter. The spiritual principles will apply to any situation in our lives.
Yeah, we often get asked about boundaries. We're doing a workshop on boundaries, and you know, at the end of the day, the 12 traditions are all about boundaries.
Absolutely.
But it's important for me to recognize that any meaningful boundary that I ever set is not with that other person. It's with me.
Yeah.
Right? Boundaries define what I will and won't allow into my life. They are frankly not about the other person. They are affected by my boundaries, but the boundaries that I set are not for their benefit, they're for mine.
And each of these principles help me to mature. It's actually to help me to grow up, to be a little bit less selfish and self-centered.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you know, we come to Codependence Anonymous because of this hunger for healthy and loving relationships. Now, I'm sure, because I've met some of them, that there's people walking around out there right now who grew up in functional homes and were modeled good behavior as kids and came to adulthood knowing how to get along with the people around them, able to have healthy and loving and functional relationships with the people in their lives. I'm not one of those people. I need a relationship with a loving higher power. I need the supervision of an adult sponsor. I need a 12-step program of recovery, and I need these arbitrary guidelines that are unnatural to me. show me how to do things differently. And that's what the 12 traditions represent in my daily life these days. Now, I say that they are unnatural to me. Over time, they become less unnatural. They become more habitual. In all humility, I believe that I've become better at them than I was 15 years ago. But am I perfect at it? No. No, I'm still a walking example of progress rather than perfection.
No, I personally believe that if my higher power wanted me to be perfect, my higher power would have created me that way. And apparently that's just not the plan. You know, it's just not the plan. You know, in sickness, I used to say that we sink to the level at which we're comfortable. And when we met each other, we were not healthy little puppies. And it took me a while to realize that I was at least as unhealthy as my spouse, at least as unhealthy. And what I came to realize is that it was the horns on my head that fit the holes in his, and together we made each other sicker until we actually came to recovery. And then very gradually, we became more two complete individuals. Like initially, when I was 16 years old, I anticipated that I'd meet some guy and then he would complete me, you know, like fill in the spaces that I was lacking, right? That's very codependent. In recovery, we come to appreciate we need two complete individuals in order to be able to have a greater life, that we can enhance each other's recovery. So as we've gotten better, the nice thing about program is though, like in sickness, we sink to the level at which we're comfortable. In recovery, we can raise to the level at which we're comfortable. And as we each get better, our relationship gets better. And we continue to become two complete separate individuals that are united by those ties that I was talking about at the beginning. So we're those two rails with the ties that bind between us.
Yeah, and not just in our marriage, but in our friendships, our family relationships, and our work relationships. As we bring better relationship tools to the party, we attract healthier, more functional relationship partners at every level. So consequently, today, I have friendships that are deeper than anything I've ever known. I have brothers and sisters in this fellowship who are closer to me than anybody that I'm related to by blood. I get to enjoy a marriage today that I couldn't have imagined was available to me. And that's the kind of life that I get to live today. And I blame it all on the traditions. You know, I talk about, you know, when I do the big podium talk about how the fellowship saved my life and the steps saved my sanity, and the traditions saved my marriage. Now, the traditions didn't just save my marriage. They absolutely did save my marriage. The traditions gave me a life, because the quality of my life is defined by the relationships that I'm in. And I get to enjoy better relationships today because of these tools than anything I ever knew before. So we have a couple of things. That's as much as we have to present you with today, other than we have a couple of visuals that we brought. If somebody can screen share. First of all, we have this thing. You know, was somebody set up to screen share these?
Oh, I think we can. We could screen share, could we not?
You can if you have them, or I can. It's up to you.
I'd rather you did, because I'm on an iPad and it's a little more complicated.
Okay, just give me a second to pull them up.
Okay, so what this sheet is our wedding vows. This is what we handed out to the guests the last time we did our renewal of vows. And it's an example, not of how you should think about the traditions, but of how we've applied them in our marriage. And feel free to steal any ideas that you come across here, because none of this stuff is original to us. Yeah. So when you look at this, you can see where we've taken these ideas and we've adapted them for applications specifically between the two of us. We call it our 12 commitments, and First is our common welfare should come first. Personal growth within our marriage depends upon unity. Second, for the purpose of our marriage, there's but one ultimate authority. A loving higher power is expressed through our mutual conscience. Each of us is a trusted servant, neither of us governs. Third, the only requirement for membership in our marriage, the only requirements for our membership in our marriage are a commitment to be in the marriage and a willingness to make it work. 4, each of us is autonomous, except in matters affecting our partner or our family or the wider community as a whole. 5, our marriage has but one purpose, to serve as an expression of our higher power's love. We do this by practicing the 12 steps ourselves, by encouraging and nurturing each other's growth, and by welcoming and loving our friends and families. 6, neither of us should ever endorse, finance, or otherwise commit our family to any outside enterprise without prior consultation. Thus, problems of money, pride, or ego divert us from our primary spiritual aim. 7, our marriage ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. Each of us strives to be self-supporting physically, emotionally, and spiritually. 8, our love should remain forever unconditional, but we have the right to ask for what we need. 9, our marriage as such ought never be organized, but we may temporarily appoint one or the other to special tasks as they suit our interests and talents. 10, outside issues have no place between us. We as individuals are free to follow our personal truth, but we must never commit our partner or our marriage to outside controversy. 11, our personal opinion should be communicated openly, honestly, and directly, nice little typo there, with respect and courtesy. We need always maintain personal humility in all our affairs. And 12, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of our marriage, ever reminding us to place principles above personalities. This came about when we were 3 years into recovery, and we were coming up on our 10th wedding anniversary, and we decided that well, first of all, we decided we did like each other after all, and we wanted to stay together, and we wanted to renew our wedding vows. And we sat down to see how we could apply these 12 traditions in this format. And it was a little like sitting down to negotiate the ground rules for the next 20 years of our marriage. It was an awesome experience, actually.
Yeah, we did that in stages. And we listened to a lot of tapes. We did a lot of research. We did a lot of thinking. We each brought ideas, and we actually went over each and every word in there and needed to agree on it. So it was an interesting exercise. If anybody's looking to do something similar, I highly encourage it. Great exercise.
At the 20-year mark of our marriage a few years ago, we decided that we wanted to have another renewal of vows, and we reviewed those 12 commitments, and we changed 2 words. So they've stood us a whole lot better than the original set of vows did way back when we first. That's why we decided not to use those. And I just saw if somebody could ask for a copy. This will be posted to the website for you to download if you want it. And the other one that will be posted is this little cheat sheet. I did this up when I did this workshop at the International Coda Convention. Personally, I'm much happier today to have been able to co-present it with my beloved, because I think it always has a little more power to it when it's presented by us together. So with that, I think we can open it up for discussion or questions. Sorry, we've got a dog sneezing in the background here. But I sure thank you all for listening so patiently today, and for keeping an open mind.
And for allowing us to be here.
All the puppies down.
Thank you so much for your service, Richard and Karen. That's awesome. Before we begin, we had one posting in the chat about the seven tradition 4 questions, and possibly you were going to post those in the chat.
Well, I believe they are actually in the 12-piece relationship toolkit, but okay. Certainly I can grab a keyboard and put them in the chat. But they really are.
We can repeat them again.
Yeah, we can certainly repeat them. It's did they ask? Is it necessary? Will it be appreciated? And can I afford it?
Physically, financially, emotionally, and spiritually. You have to look at all those aspects.
Okay, so that should answer one of our participants' questions. Thank you.